Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you to our esteemed panelists for being here. This is a very diverse panel. We have people from Israel and people from the United States. We have an ultra-Orthodox Jew and modern Orthodox and a Reform and a secular, and we have, of course, a Jewish journalist, which we all know is the most dangerous denomination there is. You know, news people are never supposed to tell jokes, but I'm so far away from home that I'm feeling risque, and I will open up with my favorite Jewish joke. I imagine everyone in this room knows one version or other of this story, and it tells of a Jewish man who was stranded many years on a desert island. Let's call him Mr. Goldberg. And after many years, rescuers finally managed to get to him, and they're really surprised by the fact that he has not only thrived, but he has managed to build so many things on this island. And he shows the rescuers around, and he says, you know, this is my house, it's 3 stories high, and I also built a tennis court and a golf course and a garden and 2 synagogues. And they say, Mr. Goldberg, I mean, you've been living here alone, why do you need 2 synagogues? And he says, well, this is the synagogue I pray in, and this is the synagogue I'll never be caught dead in. So I think that we all know what synagogue we pray in and what synagogue we'll never step into, or in a broader sense, what political party we affiliate ourselves with and what party we will never be caught dead voting for. And this all leads to trying to talk about polarization. Polarization that is, I think, the predicament of the American political system and the predicament of the Israeli political system, and that really growing rift between the left and the right, the seeming vanishing of the middle, of the center, and the people in the center who don't seem to be showing up to vote. And that in this climate, both in Israel and in the United States, groups that are not the majority can exert their own power over the majority because of this situation. So I want to begin with you, Larry, and to talk about what is, quite simply, what is broken with politics?
Okay. Thank
That's
you.
Pretty large
How much
question.
time do you have? First, can we correct the title of the panel? Neither of the governments we're talking about was elected by a majority. And, of course, the way the Israeli political system works, no prime minister is ever really elected by a majority. And I think, as our dear friend and colleague Ari Carmon could explain in our breakout session, getting rid of direct election of the prime minister was actually a very good thing for Israel during that brief experiment. I mean, Jeffrey Goldberg, I think, outlined many of the problems and deepening concerns that we should have about the state of democracy in the United States, and in different ways, but with some very familiarly similar consequences in Israel as well. So I'm just going to make a few bullet points so we can have a discussion. The first one is this is a global phenomenon. It's not just going on in the U.S. and in Israel. And we have a rise of right-wing nativist, anti-immigrant pluralism and left-wing extreme in certain places, Spain, Greece, anti-establishment populism as well. So we see these trends. 1 out of 8 Germans last month voted for a party that I think it is much too simplistic to say is a neo-Nazi party, but that contains neo-Nazi sentiment within it. And that's worrisome enough. Nearly 40% of the French public voted for Marine Le Pen. And there are a number of reasons why. Some of it is racism. A lot of it is the French and German and British equivalents of the problem that Jeffrey Goldberg was talking about. So this is not the first time in world history that people have felt threatened by international forces, that people have been pushed toward or lured into racist, dangerously populist with authoritarian overtones and otherwise destabilizing or extreme types of political orientations by the fact of their declining social status or by other grievances they have. So we need to have a sense of political and historical perspective. But I think that there are a few things that are different now in the United States that we need to worry about. One that Jeff alluded to and that we know very well is that social media is, first of all, racing forward technologically in ways he described. What he said is absolutely true. And second of all, is deeply polarizing, because we all have a tendency to want to associate with people who agree with us. That tendency is accelerating. Social media has an enormous potential to magnify it. And so we live in these bubbles, these information bubbles or echo chambers, where our attitudes are being reinforced, where information passes that may be false or misleading, and people don't even question it because it's becoming from their circle of people who they know or agree with or like or whatever. So that's a very serious problem. The technology platforms, the information and technology platforms, the three biggest of which are, within a 30-mile radius of where we're sitting right now, know this is a problem. Whether they're being responsive enough to it or not is something we could debate, but some of that answer is going to have to come from innovations on their side. And finally, the American political system has, I'd say, a deepening problem structurally, because if you take the interaction of first past the post elections, where basically we get two choices in November, Republican or Democrat, and primary elections where you have increasingly highly ideological minorities from one side or the other or both, who are determining who the nominee will be. And often, given gerrymandering and given residential sorting in the United States and the increasing rise of one-party states and one-party congressional districts, when a nominee of a particular party emerges from a low-turnout primary that's been ideologically driven by the Tea Party or what is coming down the pike, which is going to be the left-of-center mirror image of the Tea Party and the Democratic Party, that's the choice. That person is virtually guaranteed of being elected. And if we don't get more choice in our politics, and there are practical ways structurally that we could reform our democracy to do that, I think this problem is going to get worse. Because I will just conclude by saying the Congress, in their hearts and in the way they'd like to vote, many of these members, is not as polarized as it appears. But the structural incentives politically are driving them to eschew compromise because they fear being punished in these low turnout primaries.
We're going to try and maybe talk later about the possible solutions to this problem. But I want to talk to you, Rabbi Hartman, about Larry mentioned this, the influential minority groups, and I want to tie it to Israel. In our discussion, when we talked, we were preparing for this panel, you said something that I'd like to quote. You said that what is keeping Israel captive is not a minority, it's the passivity of the silent majority. I want you to sort of elaborate on that.
Let's go back to the joke that we all know, right?
That you didn't laugh, I actually noted that. You two didn't laugh, I'm just saying.
We live, first of all.
I keep score, okay, yes. You've heard it too many times, yes.
No, the problem is that today we're not building the synagogue that we don't want to go to. See, that's a utopia. And a utopia, I want to go to the shul that I want to go to. But I don't fantasize that my shul is the shul that everybody else should go to. There has to be another shul. I even build the shul that I don't go to. That's a phenomenal idea. So what happens is that in Israel we have two problems. The first is
Only two? Wow, that's optimistic. Okay, two.
I'm going to handle those on relating to your particular question, and that is that first, we've stopped, different groups actually believe, whether they're the majority or the minority, that they have a right to tell all Jews what synagogue they should pray in and if you don't pray in my synagogue, you shouldn't have a synagogue at all. That is an anomaly in Jewish life, which is, from my perspective, frankly obscene. It's obscene. It's against the way we Jews have lived. It's when we tell these jokes, that's because who we are. Well, we're now the joke. The second part is not only do we fantasize that we could tell all Jews where to pray, because it's the Kotel was perfect. Everybody was going to win. No one was undermining from someone else, whether you're Orthodox or whether you belong non-egal. You had your space. The question is whether you're going to allow someone else to have a dignified space. But the second part, and is that in Israel today, the minority have, or there is a large segment of Israeli society which is perfectly comfortable allowing a group of people to dominate what constitutes Judaism. I'm an Orthodox Jew. I do things a little differently. Why is that a joke? Thank you. Oh.
You come in on the second day of Yom Tov Sheni.
I didn't know the debate began already. I'm an Orthodox Jew, and have made many choices in my life. But I never profess, or rather, despite those choices, I am committed to ensuring that other people have the choices that reflect and represent their values, their ideology. In Israel today, there is a large segment of Israeli society which is perfectly comfortable saying, you take care of Judaism, I'm outside of the story. Since I don't go to the Kotel, I'm not going to fight for your rights at the Kotel. And a democracy, a liberal democracy, whether it's on issues of the LGBTQ rights, whether it's minority rights, whether it's refugees, the greatness of a democracy is determined by whether the majority is willing to fight for the rights of the minority. Mm-hmm. And in Israeli society today, the voice of that majority is silent. And there's another group of people who have every right to pursue their ideology, but there is no counterforce offering a different vision of Israeli society.
I'm going to have Jonathan Rosenblum answer, because it seems, Jonathan, that you have a lot to say, and then I want Rabbi Jacobs to answer you. By the way, just know that Jonathan flew in today from Israel and is flying tonight back to Israel, so blink and you might miss him. So he's obviously a man who's up for a challenge. Yes, Jonathan?
Okay, I think it's interesting that neither Jeffrey nor Professor Diamond actually really got to discuss too deeply democratic theory, which is the idea that most of the lawmaking power resides in the elected representatives of the people who stand for election periodically. That wasn't discussed. There's a tremendous democracy deficit, which in many respects gave rise to the right-wing parties in Europe, gave rise to Donald Trump, and is also existent in Israel to a large extent. In Europe, the decision of the EU to admit millions of Muslim immigrants, unvetted, largely unvetted, was seen by a vast majority of Europeans as an act of demographic suicide. And it was taken regardless of them. The disdain for national culture, which is almost unanimous and characterizes European elites, is another thing that separates them from the people of the individual countries. In Israel, if you want to talk about an unelected elite that governs the country, then you simply can't ignore the Israeli Supreme Court, which is by far the most overreaching Supreme Court any place in the world.
So what you're saying is the minority is ruling the majority, but it's a different minority.
It's a different minority. I thought we were going to come to talk about the Kotel, and I saw the title, and I said, oh, we're about to have a discussion about the Israeli Supreme Court. Now, since Aaron Barak became Chief Justice of the Court, and we went through the Barak Revolution just to see how undemocratic that is. First, he declares that everything is justiciable. Every issue can be decided by the court, including troop movements in time of war. Then he does away with rules of standing, so every government decision can be challenged by anybody in the country, something that doesn't exist in any other legal system. Then he decides the standard by which the Supreme Court will rule on this multitude of issues, 1,000 cases a year that come to it, will be reasonable in light of the enlightened population amongst which he dwells. Right? The enlightened population, not the whole population, the enlightened members, by which he admits himself in his book Judicial Discretion, he means me, the judge. Okay? And then he creates out of whole cloth a position called the Attorney General, and declares that his decisions are binding upon the government without judicial review. And since that Attorney General typically goes up to the Supreme Court at some point, he's really the emissary of the court to rule in the democratically elected government. That's unreviewable. Every citizen in the country can get a review of any issue that bothers him, except the government cannot test it. And one last thing.
The issue of the Supreme Court is something that is debated in Israel. I do want to pull you, if I can, a little bit towards the discussion of the Kotel. And I do want to ask quite clearly if you think the ultra-Orthodox victory is worth the price.
What victory? This victory. I'll tell you, I have to go back to describe why I think the Kotel is so powerful in order to answer that question.
Okay.
Just by way of biographical.
You know what, can I ask it another way and then you'll answer
Kotel, yeah.
whatever you want?
Get back to it later.
Can I ask it in a different way? Do you think that American jury's support is critical for the survival of the State of Israel?
No.
No.
I'll tell you, I think here's what I do believe was Netanyahu's calculation in the end of the day. If he had to make a calculation, my guess is that his calculation was as follows. One of the most critical issues in which I'll be speaking about in the breakaway session is how do we integrate the Haredim into the Israeli economy? How do we integrate Haredim, who are 30% of the incoming first graders in the country, will be 20% of the population by 2019? How do we integrate them into the country? I have to preserve my relationship with them. With respect to American Jewry, I think you have to ask yourself the question is, 20 years ago when the conversion law came up that it would be conversion according to halakha, every heterodox leader in the country came and the prime minister trembled and that was the end of it. It doesn't happen today, and I think there are two reasons for that, and I think everybody in this room should understand what those reasons are. The first reason is that Israelis feel on an issue which was of existential significance to us. You went AWOL. That your enrapturement with the Democratic Party in a time when for 8 years President Obama ran a philo-Iranian foreign policy, not supporting the Green Revolution, which ended up with a Syria where Iran will be on our borders in the Golan, which allowed Hezbollah to amass 150,000 missiles, many of them directed at us, and not to mention, and that was paid for by the Iran deal. In other words, you put your opinions above those of us who are in the fire of Iranian missiles. Okay, that's the first thing, a sense of betrayal. The second thing is a general sense that mainstream American Jewry is just not interested anymore in us. Over 50% of American Jews under the age of 35 say that Jews have no obligation to one another. This is coming from Stephen Cohen. It's not Stephen Cohen, a professor at the Reform University. They've lost interest in us, and they're dying. So if I have to worry about the question between as Stephen Cohen wrote recently, will the Orthodox explosion doom conservative and Reform Jewry? That's a silly title because Reform and conservative Judaism could grow as fast as they want if they were selling anything. But as Rabbi Jacobs said in 2013, we've lost 80% of our youth by the time they reach their teenage years.
So let's put a period on that for a minute. Rabbi Jacobs, I imagine there's a lot you want to say. So.
Just a wee bit.
Go ahead, sir.
Well, first of all, let me say that the Haredim did not win at the Kotel, and the Supreme Court is going to be speaking loudly and clearly and will come in the coming months. Not that will finish the discussion, but it will add. And I just want to say that the whole question of religious pluralism, we often talk about it as if it's a soft issue, right? It's a favor that nice people should grant to other nice people. Rabbi Jacobs, you seem like a nice person. You know what, we're going to give you a little religious freedom. We're talking about democracy. It is a fundamental of a democracy that there is religious freedom. It's not a favor, it is a right. And how ironic it is that we dreamt of this third commonwealth, that we dreamt and worked and built this incredible Zionism 1.0, Zionism 2.0, and Zionism 3.0, and how ironic that the one democracy in the world that discriminates against the majority of Jews in the world is the state of Israel. That's just a fact, and it's not a comfortable fact. It's not one, frankly, that anyone here today, I would imagine, would think is something that, maybe it'll correct itself in Zionism 7.0. It's critical, and it is an existential question. And it is one of those things that's, first of all, it's not about, just the question of will we relate to the state of Israel as a North American Jewish community. We are joined in the heart and in the very fabric and marrow of who we are. But the government of Israel is frankly pushing away the majority of Jews in decision after decision. And the irony is that we're not actually pulling away, we're being pushed away. And for Zionism 3.0, we have got to figure out how the two largest Jewish communities on this planet cannot simply relate to one another, but actually depend on each other in the most critical ways.
Why is this message not getting across to Israelis? I mean, there are ways to talk over the head or underneath the government. Why is the majority of Israelis, 86% of them saying they want a religious freedom for all citizens, why are they not buying this message?
Well, first of all, if you get the right lever, they buy it. If you talk about the Kotel, which is symbolically the powerful issue, particularly for North Americans, it's symbolically this idea that if you can have a Kotel for all Jews, that Jonathan can find his spot and that all of us can find our spot, that's symbolic of the state of Israel for all Jews. So it's not only about the Kotel, it's symbolic about all of it. But if you start with civil marriage, and if I can talk about discrimination around the lack of religious freedom in marriage is one of those fundamentals. And Israel's the only democracy on the planet that does not grant religious freedom around marriage and divorce. The two are critical. And if you think about how Israelis, whether they go to Cyprus or they're just going to get married and not worried that the rabbanut, that the chief rabbinate will not respect and will not actually record their marriage, I think that's the lever that, again, as Rabbi Hartman said, it may be now a minority, it's not a majority of Israelis who are secular, but a majority of Israelis, 63% in the latest Chidush poll, say that they're in favor of freedom to marry. They'd like to choose who it is. They might choose a Reform rabbi, a conservative rabbi. They might choose a modern Orthodox rabbi. But right now we have the Haredization of the Israeli rabbanut, and that says that even modern Orthodox, the Rabbanate Sohar and others, are going to be pushed out of the legitimacy. And if we just talk roughly numbers, just to throw out a demographic, right now, according to the Gutman Institute, there are about 10% of Israelis who identify with the Reform and Conservative movement. However you do the demographics about the Haredi population, and you're right, the graph is going like this, but right now we're about the same size. But the Haredi community is so organized on the issues of religion and state that is the thing that they will vote, that is the thing that they will absolutely advocate for, and will not see a whole host of other issues. That will be the sole thing. And for the other Israelis, it's not the only thing. It's one of many things that's part of the calculation. But this story isn't finished. But we better attend to it pretty quickly, because the pushing away of the majority of Jews in North America with the black eye of decision after decision. And by the way, when the chief rabbis, right before Yontif, the chief rabbi of Jerusalem, Rabbi Shlomo Amar, says that Reform Jews are worse than Holocaust deniers. Now, he's entitled to think whatever he wants. He's entitled to speak freely. He's entitled to write it. What he's not entitled to is a salary from the state of Israel. That is yet one more offense, and it's too much.
Just one more thing for you, Rabbi Hartman. Why, obviously, we're dancing around this topic, but the ultra-Orthodox have political power in Israel. They have immense political power because no coalition can survive without them. And if anyone here thinks that Bougie Herzog would make a different decision on the Kotel, probably not, because
There are
he's
two
dependent.
coalitions since 2000 which didn't have any Haredi members, so that's simply not true.
But ever since the Haredim, and they vote as Rabbi Jacob,
Sharon did not
and
have any
everything is
Haredi
important
minister.
to them, and they have a lot of achievements on their end. That's no question. Why are the liberals in Israel why don't they have the same power, the same political power?
I'm hunted. I don't think any of us really know. I think much of Israel is stuck in Zionism 1.0 and 2.0. And it's only when Israelis will become part of Zionism 3.0 that they will wake up to that conversation. Issues of security are number one. Issues of economic prosperity, number two. Issues of religious freedom and democracy, number 8. And as long as they vote accordingly, that's what's going to happen. And until, in many ways, religious pluralism is a commitment when you yourself have stake in the game. When you care about something, you fight for religious diversity. As long as secular Israelis live in this dichotomy between religious and secular, as long as they see that as somebody else's agenda, they're just not going to vote. They're going to vote for the Zionism 2.0 questions. And in many ways, the part of what's taken place, or the step back that I believe is taking place in Israeli society, is that with Oslo, we started to enter Zionism 3.0, but instead of going to Zionism 4.0, we've gone back to Zionism 2.0 in Israel.
Can I,
And the questions of security, fear, those dominate the conversation. And the questions of human rights, freedoms, etc., are less significant. And this is not going to come from the top down. There's not going to be a constitution, and there's not going to be a way to tell Israelis care about human rights until the majority of Israelis believe that Judaism is something that they want to fight for their own personal expression, until they feel that the Kotel is not just what Reform Jews could do, but how I want to worship. Until they don't do that, we're going to continue to have this dominance of not of Haredi political power, but of a constituents which makes it their number one agenda versus a community which makes it their number 8
Jonathan,
agenda.
just hold on that point for a minute. Larry, you wanted to make a comment on what we were hearing?
I would like to say two things. Number one, I agree with Rabbi Hartman. I would generalize the point. It's true in the United States as well. I'm sure I'll be criticized for the analogy. But whenever you have a group that is a minority but feels passionately and existentially about the issue, and in the United States I will make the analogy to guns, they will prevail over a majority that is diffuse and has a lot of other things they care about. The second point I want to make is that Israel has proportional representation. Most proportional representation systems don't have a single issue dimension that governs the political space. It's multi-dimensional. It cuts in a variety of ways. So this is an issue dimension that governs electoral choices. But, well, sometimes people actually try to raise economic and social issues and make that an issue dimension. It's become more difficult in Israel over time. And then there's the other issue dimension, which I think has to be factored into the discussion at some point, of the broader geopolitical context and the occupation and the issue that has been raised repeatedly of whether Israel can continue to be a democracy, a Jewish state, and greater Israel. The three cannot be indefinitely squared. And there are a lot of Israelis, I think, who view this as the existential issue, and so they're not as passionate about what we're talking about now as the people who feel this is the one issue that they're going to devote their whole electoral focus to.
Jonathan, can you relate to what both rabbis were talking about, the feeling that the fact that there is no a freedom in Israel, the freedom of religion, the fact that the rabbinate controls everything? It's something that can you understand what their feeling is, even if you don't agree with them?
I'll tell you the truth. There is a place, and there has been since 2000, a place to pray. The Orthodox look the other way with respect to heterodox prayer at the Kotel. There's a lot of things that were just said. First, I'd like to relate to some things that are simply not true. Panim, which is a pluralist umbrella organization, did a survey of Israeli parents with children in the school system and asked them, how many of you identify with the Reform or Conservative movement? The answer was 0.4. There's 600 shuls which people are davening in daily in Tel Aviv. There's one reform shul. The idea that we're talking about equal groups there.
So you're saying there are much less reforms in Israel, but you
No,
can't say that they're not a huge group in the United States and that they have
well,
huge power.
we can talk about that. We will.
Okay.
But there were 1 million Israelis who came to the Kotel. It's not because they're oblivious to it. It's not because of it's no interest to them. From the beginning of Elul till today, till the end of the Chagim, 1 million Israelis came to the Kotel. They were not uniformly Haredi. They weren't. The majority of them were not Haredi. It's not that it doesn't matter to them. The average Israeli who describes himself as secular, if you look in the Gutman studies, is so much more observant, fasting on Yom Kippur, Brit Milah, mezuzah, whatever you take, a kashrut in the house and so forth, than the average American Reform or Conservative Jew. That we're talking in different universes. We sometimes think of secular there, doesn't mean anything.
Rabbi,
I want to know.
A little derech eretz and a little truth. You're generalizing about the largest group of Jews in the world. And excuse me, Jonathan, we not just care, we observe, we learn, and we do. So please don't, in a self-righteous and completely inaccurate way, characterize the majority of your fellow Jews.
No, Rick, I'm not coming. I wasn't raised in the Haredi world. Let me just share a story with you, and it captures something about what I think is going on in Israel. After I finished Yale Law School, I came to Israel in 1976. I spent the whole year there. I was there waiting to meet my brothers for the bicentennial of the United States on the morning of Entebbe. I got on a bus, and I asked myself, and there was dancing, there was people hugging each other. I said, what's going on here? What is it? My Hebrew still wasn't good enough to understand what was happening. And then I finally understood that they had rescued the captives in Entebbe. And I started to think to myself, what makes me feel so close to everybody on this bus? Why do I feel that we're joined together in some way as one Jew? Whereas I get on a subway in the United States, I never put out my arms and say, hey, we're all Americans. It never would occur to me I'd be taken to Bellevue. I think that I'm whiter, richer, better educated, all the things that distinguish me from fellow citizens. But here, somehow there was something connected to me.
So how do you follow up on that connectedness?
So I asked myself, what was this connecting factor? And I said, it's the fact that each one of us was an unbroken chain of ancestors who had found something so powerful in their relationship to God that they had endured pogroms, exile in every generation, that they had had resisted the blandishments of a society that was always willing to take them in. And I asked myself in 1976, would it be possible for a secular American Jew at the end of the 20th century to find that power? Can you still tap into that power? Now, So I think the fact is that when the majority of American Jews, as Jack Wertheimer and Stephen Cohen have described their taste in ice cream and films, they haven't hit the Jewish story. They're not living the Jewish story. I came from a home in which we, for the first time in my whole childhood, in the 1967 UN debates, we sat in front of the TV because we felt the Jewish story. My parents have 4 Haredi kids who went to Yale, but they told them that the most important thing about you is the fact that you're a Jew, and we all went to find out what it is. I wanted to know whether that power could still be found. 110,000 Jews in America today, according to the Pew study, were not born Orthodox and are living Orthodox lives today. This is a community,
You only have to be
our
ultra-Orthodox. That's your only way to feel like you're a
but
Jewish
I'm saying-
person?
no, what
That's
you-
the only point?
There is one fact. This is the basic fact of all Jewish history. There's no getting away from it. Any community that has not been attached to intense Jewish learning and mitzvah observance has disappeared. There is no example in Jewish history.
So
of a
Reform and
community that has
conservative
sustained
Jews
itself.
don't learn and don't practice Judaism? I mean, that's what your claim is, that the only, what I'm trying to understand is the only way to be an the only way to be Jewish is ultra-Orthodox?
I'm just telling you a historical fact that no such community has ever existed and sustained itself. What is true that Israelis understand this in a way Americans don't. Because when you live in Israel, there's a fundamental question you have to ask yourself. Why does the collective existence of the Jewish people matter? Why does it matter? Because I'm going to give up 3 years in the army. I'm going to make a lot of sacrifices. I'm going to be living here under the Iranian nuclear threat, under the Hezbollah threat. Why does it matter that the collective Jewish people continue to exist? And almost uniformly today, they come to the realization one thing the answer to that question must be found in the Torah. It must be found in the Torah. I work for an organization now that works with all the pre-induction academies to the Army. Secular pre-induction academies that came to a Haredi group of women and said, would you give us a 1 day a month of an intense educational experience? We want that from you. There are tens of thousands of Jews every week in Israel who are learning with somebody from the Haredi or modern Orthodox or the national religious community. When they come, they sense that the answer to that question, why does the collective example matter, is found within those who have the closest connection to the Torah.
I wanna go back to both of you and ask, because there's something that Jonathan said earlier in the conversation. He said American Jewry is dying, and a lot of people are saying, is this at all a danger? Is the disappearance of American Jewry a danger?
So can I just first say there's actually something we agree on. This may be
Hallelujah.
This may be the chiddush you were waiting for, but not actually expecting. Jonathan, I was also living in Israel during the Entebbe rescue. I was living on Mount Scopus. I was a student at Hebrew University, and I can describe in exactly the same words the experience you have on that bus. It shaped who I am. It continues to do so, and I'm not alone. Mm-hmm. Let me just reflect also, if I could, about your joke at the beginning.
You too did not laugh. I'm just saying.
But it's not about the joke. But let's imagine the joke a little bit different. Maybe you can tell us on the news tomorrow night. Let's say that the state of Israel shows up on that island and says, we actually believe that there really should just be one synagogue on the island. And we're going to not only help build it, we're going to help pay for the rabbinic supervision, and we're going to have a stake that this is the only legitimate one. So unfortunately, in this reality, the story has other resonances. Let me just address your question of, are we dying? So I was asked by the Prime Minister's office if I could speak to Yariv Levin, who is the Minister of Tourism. He came out 2 weeks after the government decided 15-5 to approve the compromise, and it is a compromise over the Western Wall. Yariv Levin came out and said it in every news outlet. I was there, and he said, why are we bothering? Don't give the Reform and Conservative Jews a place at the Kotel. They're disappearing. They won't be here in 5 or 10 years. It's a waste. So the Prime Minister's office said, would you speak to Minister Levin? I said, with all due respect, he works for the Prime Minister. Maybe the Prime Minister would speak to him. He said, well, he already has, but you should. So I'm walking in the Knesset the next day to another meeting, and there's Minister Levin walking towards me. I put out my hand. I introduce myself. He says, I know who you are. I said, I know who you are. I said, and I have to say, you have such misunderstanding of who we are. I said, you characterize that we, the Reform movement in particular, at the door of Jewish life, we're escorting people out. We're showing them the door, the exit, saying, please, leave. We're at the door, Minister Levin, but you've got the direction wrong. We're not helping anyone out. We're helping thousands, hundreds of thousands, and even millions in. And then I said, You're the minister of tourism. How about you come visit us? I'd like to take you to see our summer camps. And even the one that just burned to the ground in Santa Rosa, I was there on Friday. And to see not just the Judaism that's alive and vibrant and serious and passionate, but also the way in which the love of Israel is also cultivated. The most amazing thing about our summer camps, and we have 18 of them as of this coming summer, are the Israelis who come bringing their love of Israel. They show up and they've got, all the paraphernalia. You got the flag, they got all the things, they're ready to go, and they come to share their love of Israel, and they do, and it's fabulous. And then they're surprised that they experience a Judaism that is so open, so engaging. Shabbat becomes real to them. Prayer becomes real to them. So they go back not having only brought something, they return for the first time, almost all of them, with a love of being Jewish, a love of Judaism. That's what's going on. That's the reality. That's Zionism 3.0, and we'll be richer as a Jewish community if we can bring our gifts and we can receive our gifts from one another, because there's a critical role for both of these very large Jewish communities.
That was my question was an example of a provocative, Israeli journalist asking a provocative question, right?
And you did.
I want to start talking, because we're sort of past the middle, and I want to start talking about the future and maybe some sort of solution, or trying to be a little more optimistic than a little bit of the bleak descriptions we've been hearing here. So first of all, Larry, is there a solution to the fact that the majority in both countries, in Israel and the United States, feel like their voice isn't being heard?
Well, I've got to say, I think the solution is a little bit more visible to me in the United States than it is in Israel. And maybe that is because I know the United States better, but I think I know Israel a little bit. I took a group of Stanford students there last summer to study Israeli democracy under stress. This was one of the issues we looked at. I happen to identify with almost everything that Rabbi Jacob said, but I don't want to pile on here.
Don't worry, I can handle myself.
You seem to be very robust and articulate in that regard, so I have no doubt. Let me just say a couple things about the United States. In a way, I'm reluctant to do so because I think we have a focused and important discussion here. And I just want to add one thing to this, which is really a comment to Jonathan. Before I answer your question, really very briefly, you may say, Jonathan, that you think American Jewry is not that important to the future of Israel. As a political scientist who kind of looks at geopolitics as well as domestic politics, and as a Jew who cares deeply about the future of Israel, I think that is not a prudent thing to say, if that is what you meant.
I said it's not essential. Is it important? It's important because I care about the Jewish future, but it's a difference.
I will continue fighting for America to stand with and behind Israel, but I worry. There aren't a lot of other countries in the world that are willing to do so, and none with the power and consequence of the United States. And I worry greatly for the future of Israel if we lose that. And this kind of posture, in my opinion, is not in the long run or even the medium run going to help our cause in the United States in that respect. Briefly, with respect to the United States, Yonit, the problem is that I think the majority of Americans, whether they're left, right, or center, lean toward the center. But the more passionate participants lean toward the extremes. Moderates are by nature moderate, so they vote, and maybe they contribute, maybe they walk precincts, but they don't lose the level of sleep that the extremes do, working so intensely for a cause. I think that is part of what needs to change, because our democracy, our liberal democracy in the United States, and I think elsewhere, is in deep danger. One of the things that I think would help would be to open up the political process with ranked choice voting in the United States, so people had other choices. And if you get the Tea Party displacing a reasonable person in a primary, I don't even want to say a moderate. You look at the voting record of Richard Lugar when he was defeated in the Republican primary in Indiana. This was, he was a mainstream conservative. He was not a liberal Republican. Now you've got Steve Bannon who wants to do the same thing to Orrin Hatch. Please, this man is a very conservative Republican. But the goal is to strike terror in them in terms of making any compromises at all that might actually make our country more governable and enable us to solve our problems. People need other choices. And right now, it's really not realistic to do so, because if you have these two choices and it's first past the post, people fear that if they, quote, waste their vote, end quote, on a third-party candidate, then they will elect the party that they most fear or dislike. If you open it up the way elections are held in San Francisco, for example, and you can rank your choices, you can vote for an independent or a kind of new voice or a synthetic voice, and if that person doesn't make it, your vote can be transferred to your next choice. I think that would really change the calculus in a lot of, not all, but a lot of districts in the United States. And if you move toward open primaries rather than closed primaries, that may also open up the selection process a little bit more. Now, Israel has a very different electoral system, and it creates a different set of problems.
Indeed, to say the least. But we have about 10 minutes left, and I want to kind of embed some questions from the audience. So I'm reading one, and I think this is for you, Jonathan. If the Orthodox Jews are the only important people, I'm sorry, my American Jew, I was looking for something else. What would be the harm of acknowledging that Reform Judaism is just as legitimate a form of Judaism as ultra-Orthodox? Who would suffer from that determination? If we knew this, we could make progress.
Well, I think actually the idea that Judaism is whatever you want it to be, the idea that the old Carly Simon song, whatever you want me to be, that's what I'll be, that there are no ways of defining Judaism. I mean, an Orthodox Jew can point to text, he can point to the Talmud, he can point to the codes, he can point to say, this is where I get my Judaism from, these are the classical commentaries. Once you've done away with the idea of law, I mean, it was Paul who called the law the accursed law. That's how the Christians always defined Judaism, as the religion of law, the accursed law. But we are a religion of law. Once you say nothing's binding, there is no such thing as a binding mitzvah. Neil Gilman of JTS said, a binding mitzvah is whatever you choose to be bound by. So it's whatever you choose it to be, that has no sustaining power, because you can't.
Just because they don't agree with you doesn't mean they're not real Judaism. Just because you know what, Rabbi Jacobs, you can answer that.
Yonit, I can describe where you get a definition of Judaism, but where will they say, what is philosophically my way of proving that this is legitimate? When you say, I'm going to put, if you want to say, I put God second.
Didn't Jewish history prove that if you say there's only one right way to be Jewish, that could be catastrophic for the Jews
What's
themselves?
your example? What about the Karaites?
You answer this, Rabbi.
What about the Karaites, the Sadducees, all the groups that disappear?
Yonit, if you believe that you will be able to get somebody from one denomination to necessarily accept that another denomination are these and these are the words of the living God, someone who feels and grows up in the Haredi community to do so, that will not be successful. But I don't believe that's the critical question is not who Jonathan thinks is a good Jew. With all respect to Jonathan, Jonathan's a very fine human being. I don't know, I never heard anybody appoint Jonathan as the arbiter for the Jewish people over who is a good Jew. The question's not, Jonathan should think whatever, Jonathan should believe what he believes, and Jonathan should pursue whatever Jonathan believes and advocate for whatever institutions and vote, great. But this is the state of Israel. Here, Jonathan could turn to everybody in this group and basically say, you're disappearing, you're not important. Great. It goes back to what Rick said beforehand. It's not about Jonathan.
Now we agree on something else.
Great. The Jewish people are and have walked through history, making sure that no single voice could ever determine who is a good Jew. No one could do that. Jonathan wants to determine that for himself, fine. It's when the Jewish people turn to Jonathan and say, Jonathan, please decide for us. That, for me, is Chelm. Now, if the state of Israel, no, it is, and it's nothing. Now, if the state of Israel, and part of the problem is how do we in Zionism 3.0 get out of Chelm? It's not about getting ultra-Orthodoxy to accept other people. It's not about the reform movement accepting, it's not about that. We have to decide. It comes back again to your joke. Are we a shul or are we a people? A shul, you get to decide who goes into your shul. You get to decide who has an aliyah. You get to decide who's important and who's not important. Ladies and gentlemen, we're not a synagogue. One of the most beautiful things about Judaism is that we are a nation and a people. And a nation and a people goes beyond the individual ideologies. A nation and a people finds ways in which people of diverse perspectives and ideologies could live with each other. That's not Zionism 3.0, that's Judaism 1.0. And let's connect back to that.
Amen, amen. I would just say, Jonathan, you may be right. I believe you're 100% wrong, but you may be right. What is not a smart move for the Jewish people or the Jewish state is to basically make that an official position of the government of Israel. It has no business deciding those questions. And I would just say, I happen to have been in New York City with Naftali Bennett, it was 2 years ago, obviously our Minister of Education and the Minister of Diaspora Affairs. He had just come from a non-Orthodox day school in New York City. And he could not stop talking about how unbelievable the experience was. He said the level of Hebrew, the tzionut, the study of the sort of the story and the history of the modern state of Israel, the level of textual fluency. He was just beaming. Basically, a week later, the chief Ashkenazi rabbi said, how dare he go to that school? How dare he not check with one of the rabbis to know that he should not be walking into that school as a minister of the government of Israel? Now, something has gone terribly wrong, not only with the whole promise of Zionism, but the modern democratic. We're talking about the Jewish democratic state. And we have to disentangle, because what's happening, unfortunately, is the coercive Orthodox monopoly is having an effect on the non-Orthodox Israelis. And it's actually showing a caricature of the Jewish tradition as we have known and loved it. One concrete example. I was in Charlottesville right after that horrific Shabbat. What was amazing is, first of all, there's one shul, the one that everybody goes to, is a Reformed synagogue. The rabbis of the synagogue decided on that fateful Shabbat morning to pray early. Now, they could have prayed early so that they could get home and be safe, but that wasn't why they prayed early. They prayed early because they knew that they had a Jewish obligation to stand with the faith community against bigotry, against white supremacy, against anti-Semitism. And so they connected the experience of fortifying themselves, the Haftarah, the Torah text, the davening, so that they could go out and do another primary Jewish act. Can you imagine in the modern state of Israel a Judaism that would be so intent on Jewish learning and Jewish observance and so committed to the social justice imperatives? We have a chief rabbinate that has made a caricature out of the Jewish tradition. When have you heard a chief rabbi talk about a matter of justice, a matter of discrimination against a minority? When have you heard them talk about issues of public morality? They talk endlessly about important issues of ritual observance. We are fighting for the soul of Israel. We're fighting for the legitimacy of the Jewish democratic state. And with all due respect, the Jewish future will only be bright when actually we can not just disagree here, which we can very civilly, and I respect the Judaism. And I would die, Jonathan, to protect the Judaism that you love and practice. And I would say that we're not going to have that vibrant Jewish future until you can acknowledge in some small way, not the legitimacy of what we do and who we are, but the legitimacy of the Jewish people, past, present, and future, no matter how we observe, no matter what we believe. That has to become, once again, a primary imperative. Like you felt on the bus that day, that has to be worldwide part of the Israeli commitment, and the Jewish state has to be, part of its Jewishness is to care for the well-being of Jews around the world, and vice versa. And in Zionism 3.0, we have not only a right, we have an obligation to be part of the unfolding of the Judaism and the democracy that is the modern state of Israel.
Our time is beyond up, but I will let you. Yes, something positive, please.
It's going to be very positive. I think I can be positive. There was a commentary symposium about 20 years ago which asked various theologians across the spectrum. It's positive in the sense that I want to offer you a solution. I want to offer you a solution at a time when 4 out of every 5 marriages involving a non-Orthodox Jew in America are intermarriages. So now let's talk about what could reverse that situation. What could reverse the demographic?
Positive, Jonathan.
No, this is positive.
Okay, positive and wrapping up. Yes.
Okay. So in that symposium, there was not one non-Orthodox participant who would affirm the basic Jewish idea of a chosen people. Not one. Jack Wertheimer was the provost of the Jewish Theological Seminary, has said this over and over again. If we cannot convince our children that it is the greatest privilege to have been born into the Jewish people, that it links us back to Sinai, that it links us to the greatest contributions to mankind, that it gives us that we are the people through whom God reveals himself to the world and reveals a world, what a world would be like with a God-centered world. If we cannot look at our being born Jewish as the greatest privilege, then there in fact is no hope. And every time I've written about chosenness, I've been attacked and attacked and attacked. Racism, it's racist. You can't talk about the Jewish people as chosen. If you cannot affirm that, there is no reason why anybody's children should marry another Jew. There is no reason why they should care about whether the Jewish people go on existing. If you cannot figure out what is the nature of that chosenness and why it is so crucial, you have nothing to pass on.
Rabbi Hartman, wrap this up for us. And good luck. Good luck to you.
A prayer. Jeffrey, you said I'm a rabbi. I think a really important step forward is when we stop telling everybody else what is it that you need to do in order for your Judaism to be meaningful. That the Jewish world will be stronger when instead of talking to each other, we can listen a little bit. We could hear what you testify about the depth of your Judaism. That I could hear the joy, that I could hear the meaning, and that maybe I could learn from it. In Zionism 3.0, Israel will be the homeland of the Jewish people, when all Jews will be respected, and respect doesn't start within the legal tradition. Respect starts when we're able to hear you, when we're not talking to you, and I don't want to convert you, and I don't want to fix you. I just want to hear you. And when Jews could hear, maybe a new Torah will be produced, because at the end of the day, that's what we need. We need a Torah of Israel. And a Torah of Israel is a Torah of Jewish peoplehood. There's so much. I would just, you know how it would end? There's this great statement of Derech Eretz Kadmala Torah. Being a mensch has to be an integral part of what it means to be a Jew. And being a mensch is to see people and to hear people. And when Israel becomes menschlich, when Israel becomes Jewishly decent, then we won't be worried about whether the Jewish people will continue. We won't be worried about whether the Jewish people are going to walk away from each other. We won't have to talk about whether we are chosen. We'll be able to talk about the great creative forces that we could yet unleash together. Amen, may it be so.
So we will end on that high note. Thank you very much, all of you, for coming here. I'll just return, and thank you for listening. I'll just return to the joke that started this discussion. It seems as we progress in our discussion, it's less and less funny. But I'll just say that as an Israeli, I would hope that we Israelis are not the man on the stranded island from this metaphor, and that we manage to bridge the divide and talk and listen, as you said. And thank you very much for listening to us.